Night, 330 BCE. Cedar beams crack, gold leaf blisters, and fire walks the terrace that kings built to look like order made of stone. Some say it was a drunken whim, others a calculated answer to older wounds. The ground says a third thing: ceremony burned first. Tonight we read Persepolis without legend by three reliable engines: stone, which staged obedience; clay, which counted it; rations, passes, pay; and road, the royal line of stations that made a far empire feel near. Well, ask what truly vanished in the flames, what survived in walls and tablets, and why this blueprint for authority echoed into late antiquity and the medieval memory that renamed the place Throne of Jamshid. If this speaks to you, tap like and subscribe. One question for the comments: where does an empire really live, in spectacle, in payroll, or in the schedule that binds them? The first part. Begin with stone speaking in verbs. At the foot of the Kay-Romit Ridge, surveyors tap pegs into bedrock and snap a cord. Darius wants a terrace that looks impossible and behaves like policy. Blocks arrive like season's limestone, pale as bone, darker grey for a contrast, dragged, levered, and lifted until the mountain wears a ship-shaped platform. From the plain, the new city does not ask you to approach, it teaches you how. Climb the processional stairs and the lesson continues. The steps are shallow your robe won't catch, and wide delegations can move side by side without jostling. Geometry enforces manners. At the landing, a pair of Lamassu like bulls with human calm and animal power hold up the gate of all nations. The message is literal. Everyone comes in here, and everyone passes under the same lintel. Now the Apadana, the great audience hall. Its forest of columns lifts the roof, the way a festival lifts a mood. On the stairways, reliefs run like a ledger of goodwill: Medes and Elamites, Lydians and Bactrians, Ethiopians and Indians, each delegation distinct, each bearing something their land can say in the language of gifts, textiles and fine metal, horses and rams, ivory, vessels, a lion cub twisting like a ribbon. No one is shown bleeding, no one is shown conquered. Power edits the world into a teachable picture. Order wears courtesy, and courtesy pays. A micro scene. A stonemason fits a block whose edges have been chiseled with a swallow-tailed void. Another hand pours molten lead around an iron clamp to anchor to stones from within dovetail cramps. Invisible once set, the building hides its tendons. If an earthquake shudders the mountain, those secret muscles by time. Persepolis is not just display, it is resilience drafted into limestone. Problem, stated plainly. How do you turn a federation of languages and climates into a habit of obedience without standing an army in every field? Attempt, build a place where loyalty becomes choreography. Results, when the year's great feast arrives, Nowruz in spring, the provinces send their best faces and surest hands. They recite their lines in the play the terrace writes for them. They leave with honors and receipts. The center collects not only goods but practice. Myth versus evidence, quick and useful. Myth, Persepolis is the capital of the empire. Evidence, administration lives mostly in Susa and Ecbatana. Persepolis is the ceremonial switchboard, oaths, gifts, and the theater that turns empire into memory. Outcome, call it the empire stage, not its desk. Another micro scene. A foreman walks the half-finished 100-column hall and tests a column drum with a knuckle. The ring is clean. Outside, carvers polish a low relief where a royal hero takes a lion by the jaw. It looks like myth, but it's actually grammar. Chaos meets grip, grip wins, the year may proceed. Children learn that sentence before they learn to write their name. Numbers to anchor the ear. The Apadana's columns rise more than 20 meters. The terrace spreads over a dozen hectares. The stairs fold out to a depth that can swallow whole delegations in a single take. In a camera's eye, the place reads as monumental. In a clerk's eye, it reads as capacity. How many bodies can move smoothly? How many jars can stack cool in shadow? How long can a queue last before hunger turns courtesy into complaint? Pivot briefly to the workshops, tucked behind splendor. You can hear the rasp of stone saws, the whir of bow drills, the thud of wooden mallets. Tall marks run like fingerprints. Diagonal toothed chisel lines, smoothed with abrasion, until light sheens across a king's beard like water. This is public craft. A mason knows a delegation will pass his panel for decades. He edits his own vanity into a standard. That, too, is policy. A third scene to round the picture. The gate of all nations at dusk. A caravan approaches dust on hems, a rhythm in steps learned far away. A guard raises a hand, not to stop but to order. Torches bloom. Translators stand where the stair narrows. The choreography is kind. A boy with a stick points quietly. You there with the zebra-striped tribute cloth. Follow the man with the jar seal. Your moment begins in 20 breaths. The empire's courage lives less in its swords than in these scheduled mercies. Myth versus evidence again. Myth. Everything is oriental luxury, soft and unearned. Evidence. The details are hard clamps, ramps, standards of stair height, repeats of a motif just tight enough to train memory, and just varied enough to keep truth. Outcome. Wealth is the gloss, the engine is procedure. Problem, attempt, result. One last loop. Problem. Distance breeds forgetfulness. Attempt. Make a home for the year's memory, where every province sees itself doing empire correctly. Result. Men who leave the terrace carry a muscle memory of obedience. You cannot feed a whole empire here, feed its habit. Hold one more image before we close this part. A child too small to carry tribute counts the animals on the reliefs. A procession of sheep and rams. A lion catching a bull. A king seated straight as a rule. He may never see Susie's ledgers or Ecbatana's winter court. He will remember this grammar of images. When he becomes a clerk, a rider, a mason, that grammar will help him keep time with strangers. You're at part 1 of 6. Stone the stage of obedience. We laid the terrace, walked the stairs, and watched reliefs turn difference into ritual. Next, part 2 opens the storerooms and the tablet boxes. Clay that counts rations, passes, and pay that makes ceremony credible. The second part. Open the storeroom door and the empire smells like flour, dates, and seal wax. On shelves as tall as a man, jars sit by the hundreds, wine, oil, date syrup, each neck cinched with clay that bears a small, clean stamp. In a side room, a clerk bends over a tablet the color of river mud. He presses wedges with a reed and reads back what he has just fixed. Rations for a team of masons, a pass for 3 drovers, and 2 donkeys, a measure of beer for a woman late in her pregnancy. Ceremony lives out on the terrace, credibility lives here. These are the Persepolis fortification tablets, the empire's handwriting between about 509 and 494 BCE Darius years. Most are in Elamite, some with Aramaic notations, a few labels wander in Old Persian. Tens of thousands survive in one form or another. They look humble until you listen to them. Then the empire's pulse steadies. Who gets paid? Who is allowed to move? Which storehouse covers which stretch of road? How often a station must grind flour to keep pace with a caravan? A micro scene. A messenger arrives at a way station with a cylinder seal hanging from his neck string. The station captain takes a small strip of clay, warms it in his palm, wraps it over a knot in the cord, and rolls the seal once, clean and slow. The impression is a tiny theatre wing symbol. Kneeling attendant, a line of immaculate wedges. He hands back the pass. 2 days to the next station if the river is low, he says. Paperwork at speed. Problem, stated plainly, rations, road, and labor must meet on time, or ceremony breaks. Attempt, counts everything that matters and leave a trail as legible as a staircase. Results, a clerk can tell where a load of oil left the line, who bears it now, and which official's seal will be the last to touch the clay before a temple flame takes the offering. Numbers for the ear. 1 tablet lists dozens of workers quota, dependent laborers each with a measured share of grain, and beer and other log specialists by trade. Stonecutter, carpenter, scribe, cook. Scholars debate the exact status of each category, free, bound, corv, but the tablets agree on a minimum truth. People are not invisible in this system. They appear by name, by team, by job, and their food is not honorary. It is weighed. Myth versus evidence. Clean. Myth. Slaves built everything. Evidence. A mixed workforce, obligation labor, hired hands, skilled artisans paid in rations, and sometimes silver travel passes and exemptions, recorded bonuses for births and pregnancies, noted donkeys, and drivers listed so supply doesn't evaporate into rumor. Outcome. Coercion exists. This is an empire, but it runs through calendars and counters, not only whips. Another micro scene. A woman steps to the table with a token and leaves with a double measure for a month. The clerk reads aloud the line that authorizes the surplus. The storeman smiles without warmth. In a margin notch, he adds the count of jars left on the rack. Behind her, a man from a mountain village waits with a note that gets him a donkey load of flour for road duty. The pass will be checked to stations on. A poor empire improvises. A rich empire standardizes. Listen for the road inside the clay. The royal road that sprinted between Sardis and Susar also runs here as a cadence of passes and provisions. A tablet describes a courier's itinerary, station A to station B in a set number of days, with food and fodder assigned by distance, not by whim. Another logs a team of carvers traveling under official orders, escorted, fed, and expected to arrive with their hands unhurt on a certain date. The terrace's grace upstairs depends on these downstairs sentences. Define terms as we go, the way a patient clerk would. A seal is not decoration, it is authorization. A jar is not a jar, it is a promise to be opened later without argument. An entry in Elamite is not a language choice, it is a branch line into a trained bureaucracy that has served this plateau longer than the kings who currently sit on it. Accounting is not boredom, it's the empire's weather report. Problem, attempt, result. Again. Problem. People move, food spoils, memory lies. Attempt. Make the movement visible at each joint. Make spoilage predictable by schedule. Make memory honest by witnesses. Result. When Nowruz arrives and delegations climb the shallow stairs. The day belongs to spectacle, but the week that prepared it belongs to clay. A third micro scene. At dusk, a team of men racks a last row of jars and tampers the clay seals with a stamp that shows a hero wrestling a lion. Tiny, crisp, a cousin to the larger scene on palace walls. The storehouse door gets a beam across it. On a peg hang 4 tablets with loops of twine, the docket for tomorrow morning. Rations to release, a letter carrier to feed and send east. A carpenter crew do their monthly oil. Ceremony is tomorrow's camera. Clay's tonight's list. Myth versus evidence. One more bumper. Myth. Oriental luxury, soft and shapeless. Evidence. Discountable rhetoric. The tablets weigh liters, days, teams, jars, donkeys, and mouths. Outcome. Splendor is expensive. This is the bill of materials. Numbers. Quietly stubborn. If a storehouse supplies 50 men for 30 days, and each gets a set ration of grain and beer, then someone upstream measured harvest against roadloads months ago. If a pass covers 3 stations, then someone down the line counted forage along ditches and decided to donkeys instead of 1 would keep the schedule honest. There is no empire without this math. Bring a person into focus so it isn't all system. In one surviving line, a woman named Iridaboma, wealthy, powerful, overseas receipts, her teams, her supplies, her orders. In another, a regional official Parnoka moves goods through what the tablets call the king's house. Names are rare in stone, they are more common here. They don't make Persepolis kind, they make it visible. Why this matters before we climb back to the terrace. The archive makes the empire falsifiable. If a relief shows tribute and courtesy, the tablets should show passage and pay. If the relief shows a year's obedience, the tablets should show today's receipts. When a later fire walks the terrace and blackens cedar with a moral no one fully agrees on, the clay underfoot will have already told what was at stake: food, movement, time. You're at part 2 of 6, clay rations, passes, and pay. We opened the storerooms, walked the road by seal and docket, and watched bureaucracy turn spectacle into trust. Next, part 3 widens the map to the royal road itself, stations, couriers, and the schedule that made a far empire feel near. The third part Start where distance is taught to behave. A rider crests a low pass at dawn, frost stinging his teeth, a leather pouch thumping his ribs. Ahead, a line of tamarisk stakes walks across the plain. The road, and at its measured intervals sit stations with yards, wells, and feed. The Empire's couriers don't own the world, they rent time from it in dependable slices. Herodotus will later praise this relay with a sentence so neat it becomes a proverb: no snow, no rain, no heat, no night, nothing stops the post. Strip the flourish and the trick is simple. Change the horse, not the rider's burden. Change the rider, not the schedule. Each span is a promise, a hot drink, a fresh mount, a stamp on clay, a gate swinging open because the seal says it should. Problem, stated plainly. Space dilutes order. A kind decree becomes a rumor to provinces out. A tax becomes a grievance if it arrives late without explanation. Attempt, cut space into days and staff each day with a house that knows your name. Result, Susa can whisper to Sardis and be heard before a harvest turns, and Persepolis can stage a feast whose invitations do not get lost in the mountains. Walk a station at noon. A yard opens to the road. Under a reed canopy stand jars of water and sacks of barley for beasts. A clerk checks a docket. 2 couriers eastbound. 1 west. A carpenter crew due tomorrow with a permit that requires them to arrive with hands unhurt. The stablemaster rubs a mare's neck, eyeing the horizon as if time itself were visible. On a peg hangs a bundle of clay passes, each the size of a palm, each rolled once with a seal that means a gate will open down the line. Numbers that matter to ears, not pedants. A good day's ride can eat dozens of miles of hard ground. An ordinary traveler needs months to cross the backbone of the empire, but a relay can hop it in the rhythm of a festival week, segment by segment. The count isn't folklore, it's fodder per mile and fords per river. If a river runs high, the docket stutters. If a bridge stands, the docket sings. Myth versus evidence. Quick. Myth. A royal road is one road, like a spear shaft from capital to capital. Evidence. A web Sardis to Susa is a marquee string, but branches run to Ecbatana, Persepolis, Pasargadae, and down toward golf ports. Outcome. Think network with beats, not line with brag. A micro scene. Dusk wicks the color out of a flat, and a courier comes in with a crack stirrup thong. The stationer doesn't debate. He swaps the rig, rolls a seal across a new pass, and sets the man off with a hunk of bread and a swallow of date syrup. There's no trumpet, no law carved on a door. The habit is the law. Listen for the way clay and road interlock. A tablet back in Persepolis, says a team of drovers with 2 donkeys and a measure of oil left storehouse X for station Y on a certain day. The station book here says the team arrived, was fed, and passed on. If a jar breaks, both ends know where the stain begins. The terrace upstairs shows order on a clean stair. The road downstairs keeps order from fraying into complaint. Define terms the way a good teacher would. A seal is a key anyone can read. A pass is a memory you can't argue with. A station is a promise-shaped house. Water, shade, fodder. A brief protection from distance. The rider is Ongoros to a Greek, Pyridazi to a scribe. Names differ, the job is the same. Keep a schedule, breathing across deserts and snow. Problem, attempt, result. Again. Problem. Crises outrun messengers. A revolt can blossom faster than a plan. Attempt. Lay a courier's ordinary news by regular relay. Urgent news by express rides, and flag seals duplicate letters, make roads a budget line. Not a miracle. Result. When the terrace calls Nauruz, the right people arrive on the right day with the right goods, and the story the stone tells is not contradicted by empty seats. Another micro scene. A convoy pauses because a woman in labor cries out under a canopy. A clerk produces a tablet authorizing extra rations for her and the child's keeper for the next month. The road makes room for life because the clay has already argued on her behalf. The empire is not kind, it is systematic. Sometimes that looks like kindness. Numbers, quietly useful. If a station supports 20 mounts, and the mount eats a defined share per day, then the barley allocation upstream has to be measured against known traffic. If a letter must cross 3 mountain passes, the calendar must already hold days in which snow is likely, days in which heat will lay a horse flat. The schedule isn't a myth, it's a weather diary. Bring Persepolis back into the picture, so the stage and the schedule speak. A delegation that we watched on the Apadana steps began here weeks ago as names on a docket: 5 men, 1 translator, 3 gifts, a safe conduct seal with a god etched on it, and a return pass already half filled out. The terrace makes their loyalty visible, the road makes it possible. One more scene to close the loop. Night. The station's lamp hisses. A courier sleeps with his boots under his head and his pouch under his ribs. The clerk files today's clay behind a wooden slat. A jackal's voice lifts once on the plain, and then the yard falls quiet, like a pause in a line of verse. Tomorrow the same verbs: stamp, feed, ride, swap, stamp. That repetition does the Empire's hardest work, teaching far places to keep time together. You're at part 3 of 6, Road the Schedule That Binds. We watched the relay turn mountains into days, clay into keys, and courtesy into arrival. Next, part 4 returns to the terrace to test how spectacle and schedule hold together when fire walks the roofs. The 4th part. Fire arrives like a verdict and spreads like a rumor. Night on the terrace, 330 BCE. Cedar beams pop, gilded rosettes blister, and the shadows of columns unspool across flagstones as if the roof itself were learning to move. Witnesses later will disagree on the spark. Some will say a courtesan named Ties, wine bright, dared Alexander to answer Xerxes' burn of Greek temples with a mirror flame. Others will say the king chose clear-eyed to erase a royal stage before it could host Persian loyalty again. The ground, which does not drink or flatter, says a third thing: ceremony burn first. Start with what fire knows how to eat. Persepolis' most perishable parts are its most theatrical: timber roofs above the Apadana, and the 100-column hall, cedar carved into lion's paws and lotus bands, blackened now to brittle lace. Heat travels through beam to clamp, lead cramps soften and slump at temperatures a cook would understand. Stone that could outstare centuries lets go in a minute when its tendons melt. The columns themselves, stone trunks with double ball capitals, stand longer, stubborn as grammar, even when the sentence collapses around them. A micro scene in the dark. A storeman kicks a door that sticks in its frame as the lintel sags. Inside, a rack of sealed jars hums as trapped air expands, a clay seal pops and kisses the floor. Out in a courtyard, a clerk yanks an armful of tablets from a shelf, smooth, olive grey, unfired, and stumbles into air that smears his eyes. He trips. The tablets fan across the stones like spilled loaves. Sparks drift down angry snow. In the morning those tablets will be stone true forever. The fire bakes what bureaucracy meant to keep soft. Problem, stated plainly. What does power lose when a stage burns? Attempt by Alexander, or accident sets timber and lacquer alight. Result, rooflines full. Cedar is ash, gold leaf is a wrinkled whisper. And the most visible grammar of obedience, the going up of delegations, loses its voice. But the Empire's quieter sentences survive, wherever fire either misses or fixes them. Clamps hidden in shaded corridors, tablets hardened by heat. A road that doesn't mind what happens to a roof, because its verbs are stamp, feed, ride. Myth versus evidence, quick and necessary. Myth: Alexander burned the capital, ending Persia at a party. Evidence: administrative capitals were elsewhere. Susar. Ecbatana, the Persepolis complex, is a ceremonial switchboard. Archaeology shows widespread burning of palatial structures, but not a city erased to bedrock. Archives survive in part because heat turned clay durable. Outcome: not annihilation, but amputation. The state loses its theatre method. Limps on. Another micro scene plays on the slope below the terrace. Macedonian soldiers break open a treasury and feed a chain of porters with bullion. The road network that once ferried tribute now ferries plunder. Schedules care what a load weighs, not what you call it. A captain squints at a docket taken from a Chester local to be paid list for builders and bearers. It tells him where stored grain sits in the hills. which means tomorrow his men will eat. Conquest edits the labels systems still pass, hold a problematic image to the light. Later tradition likes the banquet story The King and the Hetera. The torches, a Greek revenge on a Persian stage, because it reads like theatre about theatre. But read the structure instead of the script. Whether the torch was rage or arithmetic, the choice lands in the same ledger. A working stage would keep staging Persian loyalty, a ruined stage forces that loyalty to find different rooms. Alexander does not kill an empire with a flame. He kills a place where empires rehearse consent. Numbers to steady the ear. Spring of 330 BCE falls months after Gaugamela 331 and the wintering that brought Alexander into the Persian heartland. The fortification archive belongs to Darius' earlier years, 509,000. For 194 BCE, the treasury tablets run into the mid-5th century. The dates do not overlap the fire, but the objects survive into our hands because of it. A total burn is a story fire rarely tells. Roofs become dust, and clay becomes stone. Return to the terrace under smoke. Carver's tool marks char a relief of a lion, biting a ball catches light like a photograph in a chemical bath. A boy, too new to fear, tries to push a fallen beam with a pole, while his father drags him back by the belt. Down a stair, a figurine falls from a niche and winks in coarse yellow gloom. The place was all about transitions under the lintel, up the stairs, into the crowd before the king, and now every crafted threshold is a trap coughing heat. Myth versus evidence again. Myth. An empire is a face cut the face, and the body dies. Evidence. Empires are mostly calendars, obligations on dates, stages for promises, paths for pay. Outcome. Cut the face and the body limps, sometimes toward new theatres. Susa's palaces will take more weight. Ekbatana's winter will host more faces. Memory will call the ruined throne of Jamshid, giving it a medieval crown in absence of a living one. Properly counted stakes. Persepolis loss matters less as real estate than as habit. The grammar of approach that the terrace taught the shallow steps, the gate of all nations, the reliefs that turn difference into procession stops, rehearsing obedience in the flesh. The rations and roads we measured in part 2 and part 3 can continue under new labels. But the annual lesson this is who we are when we are together now lacks its classroom. A state that lives on ceremony has to rent someone else's hall. A last micro scene before we step back. Dawn. Ash drifts like moths. Between toppled drums a single seal impression survives on a shard that once closed a jar. A tiny hero wrestling a lion, crisp as if the artisan had just lifted his hand. The big relief of the same motif above the stairs is smoke black and flaking. It looks like a moral. Small proofs outlive big pictures, but the truth is less tidy. Both mattered, the small for pay, the large for consent. Fire edits, not judges. Why this matters before we move on. We have stress tested the system. Stone taught bodies to behave together. Clay fed those bodies and tracked their movement. Road turned distance into schedule. Fire removes stone and, perversely, bakes clay. The road remains, which means authority survives as route and ration long after the stage goes mute. Later ages will rename the terrace and read it as legend. We should read it as a lab, a place where spectacle, payroll, and timetable once harmonized and where their dissonance rings on in ruin. You're at part 4 of 6. Fire the stress test. We watched wood fail, stone endure, clay harden, and roads adapt. Next, part 5 listens for how later empires and memories reused this ruined Sasanian echoes, medieval throne of Jamshid, and the modern dig that turned ash into archive. The 5th part. Begin with a new hand on old stone, 2 miles from the terrace, at Nakshi Rustam, a Sasanian sculptor in the 3rd century, CE sketches with red ochre on limestone, already crowded with Achaemenid tombs. Above him, Darius and Xerxes sleeping cross-shaped chambers cut like doorways to sky below. He carves his own king's claim into the living cliff. A horse rears, a king grips reins, an enemy kneels, a ring of sovereignty passes from god to ruler. The grammar is familiar, order tames chaos, but the signature has changed. This is not Persepolis reborn. It is Persepolis quoted. Problem, stated plainly. After the fire. How do later powers borrow an Achaemenid voice without pretending to be Achaemenid? Attempt, stand near the bones and speak in their meter. Result, the Sasanian dynasty stages investitures and victories in rock reliefs within sight of the old terrace Nakshi Rustam and Nakshi Rojob, so that memory can hear the echo. One inscription tallies triumph. Shapa I boasts of defeating 3 Roman emperors. Another frames legitimacy as a handoff between deity and king. The old tombs are the backdrop. The new cuts the cue. A micro scene. A priest reads an inscription at Kobayes Artorsh, the cube-like tower by the tombs, while a scribe copies a line in Middle Persian. The script curls differently than the cuneiform above, but the habit is the same. Claims become stone, so they can be seen as law. In the distance, the terrace glows white in desert sun. A stage without a roof, a classroom without a teacher. Still instructing by silhouette. Names shift, the place persists. In Islamic centuries, the ruin becomes Takht-i-Jamshid, throne of Jamshid, folded into the Iranian Book of Kings. It's a mistranslation with a kind of justice. When a site loses its court, a culture gives it a mythic one. A traveller in the 11th or 12th century pauses and tells a companion, "This is where Jamshid sat to judge." The exact dynasty dissolves, the function remains. The terrace keeps being read as government made visible. Another scene. Early modern this time. 17th century visitors sketch, fluted columns, and double-ball capitals, pack notebooks with counts and guesses, and argue over what tongue the chiseled signs speak. The drawings get better, the arguments get quieter. In the 19th century, an audacious climb at Behistun helps crack cuneiform Darius trilingual inscription, becomes a Rosetta 4 wedges. Suddenly the short, neat Achaemenid texts at Persepolis stop posing and start explaining. I am Darius, great king. Names that once sounded like thunder turn into syllables. You can teach a bored student. Stone recovers its voice. Problem, attempt, result. And a scholar's key. Problem. Ash and rumor cannot be footnoted. Attempt, excavate. Result, in the 1930s, systematic digs peel back collapse, layers tablet boxes, and storerooms reappear tens of thousands of administrative tablets, the fortification and treasury archives surface in light. The paradox returns. What fire did by accident, archaeology does on purpose, baking mud into memory, context into argument, hash into archive. A clerk might mutter, pleased, numbers to keep us honest. The fortification tablets cluster around 509,494 BCE. The treasury ones run mostly through the mid-5th century. The Sasanian reliefs bloom in the 3rd century CE, a good 600 years after Alexander's visit. The medieval Jamshid name is later still. Each layer adds a way to read the terrace, as imperial theatre, as Sasanian mirror, as national legend, as modern case study. No single lens owns it. A micro scene in a 20th century trench. An excavator's brush frees a cylinder seal from dust. A photographer leans in, the sun a white coin on the camera's back. On the seal, a king, a lion, a tiny winged disc, motifs we've seen large on the Apadana stairs, now pocket-sized and practical. Across the yard, a conservator lifts a tablet into a tray, its edges flake. Unless supported, someone reads a line aloud in Elamite, and the air feels unusually precise. Out past the fence, local kids race on a dirt soccer pitch. Their laughter is the best audit any ruin can have. Life goes on around a lesson. Myth versus evidence. Clean. Myth. Ruins are dead ends, monuments to endings. Evidence. The site kept recruiting meaning. Sasanian authority. Islamic era epic memory. Early modern curiosity, modern science. Outcome. Persepolis is less a corpse than a school. Each age enrolls to learn how power speaks and how records back the speech. Bring the road back in, so the network holds. Sasanian roads pick up stretches of the old arteries. Couriers still ride station to station under new names, and edicts still need fodder in the yard. The specific seals change, the verb stamp, feed, ride, do not. Medieval caravans skirt the terrace and call it Jamshids. The route still prices distance, a schedule still keeps merchants civil. The ruin does not command, but it continues to normalize the idea that rule has a stage and a ledger. Another scene in a museum basement far from Iran. A scholar unpacks a lone tablet and slides it into a foam nest. She opens a notebook and writes, PF743, ration issue pregnant woman double measure. She smiles because a sentence from 2.5 millennia ago still honors a body's need. Upstairs, visitors read a wall label that talks about kings and columns. Downstairs, a clerk's line outlives a coronation. The small proof keeps the big picture honest. Problem attempt result, once more with feeling. Problem, how to remember a world fairly when its favorite stage burned. Attempt, cross-read 3 engines stone, clay, road against each other, and then across time, checking how later regimes quote or misquote the original speech. Result, a method, not a moral. We do not get the comfort of Persepolis was X. We get the discipline of Persepolis taught X, and Y reused it, and Z misheard it. And here is how we can tell. One last image before our coda. Evening on the terrace today. Swifts cut the air like fast ink. The columns hold the sky with less effort than you'd think. A guide taps a chisel mark with his knuckle and shows a group exactly where a craftsman decided enough. On the far platform, a family poses for a photo behind them. The gate of all nations frames a rectangle of pale blue. It looks like a screen waiting for a title card. You could write Throne of Jamshid. You could write Persepolis. You could write nothing and let the grammar of the place keep teaching. Spectacle needs payroll, payroll needs schedule, schedule needs roads and rooms, and all of it needs to survive fire and story. You're at part 5 of 6, Echo and Memory. We watched Sasanians carve near Achaemenid tombs. Medieval Iran renamed a terrace. Early modern travelers sketch it. Scholars decode its voices, and archaeologists turn ash into archive. Next, part 6 is our coda: what really burned, what really lasted, and how to use this blueprint without lying to it. The 6th part. Lay the 3 engines side by side and read them aloud. Stone staged obedience, shallow steps, universal gates, a grammar of reliefs where difference becomes procession. Clay counted credibility, rations, passes, pay names attached to mouths, jars attached to roots, road made time behave, stations that turn mountains into days, seals into keys, arrivals into routine. When fire came, it did not argue. It removed the roof, baked the paperwork, and left the schedule looking for a new stage. That is the shape of what burned and what survived. Opened with a table set like a proof. On it, a broken clamp socket, its iron long gone, but the dovetail pocket clean, a fortification tablet glossed in Elamite with a neat note about extra rations, a smooth chip of column flute that still returns light like water, a clay pass from a way station. Its seal, a tiny hero and lion. Each thing is an answer to the same question. How do you keep far people in step? Phrased in stone, in clay, in road dust, none is dramatic alone. Together they perform policy. Myth versus evidence. Final pass. Myth. The blaze at Persepolis ended a world. Evidence. It ended a stage, palatial roofs, gilded beams, places where bodies learn the empire's dance. The method, counting, scheduling, ceiling could move to other rooms. Outcome. The classroom burned, the curriculum traveled. Numbers, sparing and firm. The fortification archive belongs mostly to 509,494 BCE. The treasury tablets reach through the mid-5th century. The fire lands in spring 330 BCE. Sasanian echoes, cut in the 3rd century CE. The throne of Jamshid name blooms in medieval memory. These dates are not trivia, they are the guardrails that keep story from steering off the road it describes. A scene to pull the threads tight. Morning in a present-day lab. A conservator humidifies a tablet box, a linguist murmurs Elamite syllables into a recorder, a curator taps a column fragment with a fingernail and hears the soft ring that a mason once listened for. On a laptop rests a route map that looks suspiciously like the old Royal Road with no asphalt. Outside, a bus door sighs, a guide rehearses a line. First the steps teach you how to walk, then the wall teaches you how to look. The past isn't speaking in riddles, it's speaking in workflows. Problem: attempt result. One last time. Problem: how to use Persepolis without worshipping it or sneering at it. Attempt: treat it as a blueprint, not a shrine. 3 engines that any large system still needs. Spectacle that dignifies consent. Payroll that makes promises edible. Schedule that keeps distant rooms in time. Result: a way to read other states honestly. When a government leans to hard-on show without pay, the stairs feel false. When it pays without schedule, the road snarls. When it schedules without spectacle, the center looks dry and mean. The lesson is portable. Bring a person into the frame so it doesn't end in nouns. A boy on the terrace today counts balls on a capital and asks why the steps are so easy. A woman in a museum basement smiles at double ration pregnancy and 25 centuries ago. A truck driver on the Shiraz road breaks at a checkpoint that is, in spirit, a way station with better coffee. They do not need the word Achaemenid to understand the choreography. They already live in its modern verbs: scan, pay, pass. Myth versus evidence. Last bumper. Myth: ruins are morals. Evidence: ruins are methods you can still audit. Outcome: when you stand under the gate of all nations, you can admire the balls and also ask whether your own world keeps its seals honest, its schedules humane, and its stages truthful. End where we began, with fire and survival. What burned was the most visible sentence, the annual we recited in Cedar Light. What survived was the grammar. That order is a practice, not a pose. Stone taught bodies, clay fed them, road kept them together. The names have changed, the verbs still fit. If you hear that cadence when you walk the terrace or read a line of wedges, the site has done its job again. You're at part 6 of 6. Coda: what burned, what lasted. We leave with a blueprint, not a legend. Spectacle needs payroll, payroll needs schedule, schedule needs roads and rooms, and all of it needs to survive both fire and story.